Okay, Kumlen and Ablak Gemara, and I understand you're up to Gufa.
Yep, sounds right.
Okay, so we have an interesting halacha from Shmuel. Shmuel says you walk into a store and you pick up the merchandise to determine whether you're going to buy it or not. And then he said you drop it, you are responsible because the moment you picked it up, it's as if you acquired it. And then if you change your mind and you put it back, it's like you sort of sold it back to them. So Shmuel says, Gufa, let's analyze what Shmuel says. Omar Shmuel says, Hanoitu klimen omen, you take a vessel from a tradesman, levakro, to inspect it, to see the quality and so on. The nen is biyade, while you're holding it in your hand, you dropped it and you broke it. Chayiv, you are liable. When? Well, we can assume that's as if you bought it. And when is that? The price has been fixed. We know exactly what the price is. So when you picked it up, it's as if we'll assume, why'd you pick it up? Because you wanted to buy it. You're just not making sure that it's all right. As if you bought it already. Now, there's a big machlekes rishonim. Do we actually treat it as if you bought it already and then you just put it back? Or do we treat it as if you borrowed it? And a borrower is responsible and liable for things that they borrow. And the big nafkamin al halach is what happens if it breaks mesa machmas malach. It breaks when you're doing exactly what it's meant to do. Let's say it's a knife and it's meant to cut. So you picked it up to see how sharp it is, and you started cutting something and it broke. So you were doing the work that was meant to do. It's a mesa machmas malacha. In that case, if we treat you like a borrower, then you wouldn't be liable. You took the item off the shelf thinking that this is what it's going to do, and then you want to just test it, and it broke. So you're a shayl, you're potter. But if it's a pshat is as if you bought it, then it doesn't matter why, you are responsible because you bought it, you have to pay for it. So, but the Gemara said this is all talking about the price is fixed. The Gemara in the Durim says that it's only talking about if it's something which is in high demand. So the owner knows if you don't buy it, someone else will buy it, and it's in high demand. So there's a so most or many Rishonim hold you need these two variables. In other words, like today, you walk into a store, you take something from the shelf and it slips out of your hand and it breaks. Are you liable? You're not liable. How do we treat that? So if it's a fixed amount and it's in high demand, then technically you should be liable. Other Rishonim say you don't need both variables because the Gemara here doesn't mention a word about high demand. The Gemara in the Durham that Havlam and Aleph would mention high demand, it doesn't mention a word about the price being fixed. So maybe either variable is enough to say that you are not liable. If you know exactly what the price is, you're liable, even though it's not in high demand. Or if it's in high demand, and even if you don't know the price, you probably want to buy it, and therefore you are liable. That's the machlekes. Anyway, the Gemara now tells us a few stories to support this. The Gemara says as follows. I will gather the person, the Ola Beit Hafki, went to the butcher Agba, he lifted Atma to Bisi, a side of meat, and it seems that the prices are fixed for the side of meat. This is what it cost. And Bahadid Agba, while he picked it up, Osa Parsha came along, someone riding on a horse, and Mara Menei, and just took it out of this guy's hands. But it was not in the hands of the vendor, it was in the hands of the buyer. Also, Lekame de Rav Yemer, so the buyer went to Rav Yemer to find out whether he's liable or not. He said you have to pay the price. Why? Provided that the price has been fixed. So when you picked it up, you were going to buy it if it met your criteria. It's as if you already you're a borrower or as if you bought it, and therefore you're liable. Another story. Gabra, there was a person, the icy kari, that he brought a bunch of gourds, like pumpkins, whatever, lepumnara, to the mouth of the river, set up a stall, and he started to sell it. But what happened was, also lekuli alma, everyone came along, and shokul kara. A bunch of people came along, each one took a pumpkin, and nobody paid. Basically, they got nothing. Amaluhu, the vendor, was so angry, he said, hey, mukdash l'shemayim. Okay, I don't know who to charge, but why should it have any benefits? So I'm making it all hegdish. Also, the Kamar of Kahana. These people went to Rav Kahana. It's interesting. They didn't go and pay. They all went to Rav Kahana to find out whether it's hegdish now. and therefore they can't use it. Maybe why should we pay if we can't use it anyway? Amalui said it's not hegdish because ain't other makdish dover. He had no right to make it hegdish. Why not? Because the moment you picked it up to look at it, to see whether you're going to buy it, it's as if you bought it already. So it's not anymore in that guy's possession. Provided the price is fixed. If it's not fixed, then it's still the vendor's v'shapir akdish. So from here, the Rishonim want to prove if I own an object and I lend it to somebody, and while that person who borrowed it has it, I turn around and say, you know what? I want that object to become hegdish. The law is that it becomes hegdish. So if we're saying that when the person picked up the item to examine it, he's treated like a shoyo, like a borrower, then what's the Gemara saying here? You cannot make hegdish. That the owner of these gourds cannot make, of these pumpkins, whatever it is, cannot make it hegdish. He can, because the person who picked it up is a borrower. They haven't paid for it yet. So they want to prove from here that the person who picked it up, if the price isn't fixed, it's as if he bought it. If he changes his mind, he changes his mind. But right now, it's as if he bought it. Others say that perhaps it's not really a proof from here, because when do we say that I can make it hegdish while it's in the borrower's possession? Because the borrower has no interest in buying it. Here, the borrower, even though he's only a borrower, wants to buy it. The fact that he wants to buy it, even though he's only a borrower, maybe that prevents the owner of the object from making it hegdish. So it's different than an ordinary case. Along the same lines, the Gemara continues. Torah we learned. Halakeyach yerek min hashuk. If somebody buys a vegetable for the market, now remember that if you buy from Amma Oretz, you have to assume that even though Truma, the Amma Oretz would have given, that Maisa, there's a possibility didn't give Maisa. So anything you buy from an Amma Oretz, we call it Demai, which means Damai. What is the status of this particular item? And the din is you have to separate Maisa. So what happens is you bought a vegetable in the marketplace, ubid it. And what you did was you wanted to now check it out to see whether, the quality is like, whether you want to take it or not. You put it down. You don't want to buy it. You didn't like the quality, whatever. You don't want to buy it. Afilu kol hayoim kula. Even standing there all day long and looking through these vegetables is loikana. Doesn't become his, because he's sorting out, he's going into the fruit stall and looking at all the vegetables, doesn't make it his. And therefore there's no chayiv in Maisa. This Talmud Chacham who's looking at this stall from an Amma Oretz is not chayiv in Maisa at all, because he doesn't own any of these grains that are before him. All he's doing is trying to look for good quality, and he hasn't found it yet. But if he would have decided that he's going to go ahead and buy it, the moment he would have decided to buy it, then right away he has a chayiv of Maisa. Okay, so now, but he can always change his mind. So the Gemara continues. The moment he decides, you know what, I'm going to buy it, Kona, it becomes his, and it's chayiv b'maiser, and he's chayiv b'maiser. Now the Gemara says there's a dilemma here, conundrum. So what happened was he picked the vegetables, looked at it, and then afterwards he decided, you know what, I'm going to buy it. So now he's chayiv b'maiser. At the moment he says, I'm going to buy it, he's chayiv b'maiser. And then what does he do now? If now he says, you know what, I changed my mind. I don't want anymore. So here, take it back. I'm not giving it Maisa because I don't really want it anymore. It's too late. Because since he owned it, when he gives it back, he's not changing his mind, like he sold it back. And the problem is that we have a rule, a chazaka, that a Talmud Chacham will never put back something from something that he owned without giving all the Maisa. If you go something, we live in Psachim, if you take something from a Talmud Chacham, you can assume that everything was given. The Maisa was given. So he can't just put it back there, because he does not give or sell to someone a dover she'ena mesukah, something that wasn't fixed up. So he can't put it back. Lachziri, actually cannot put it back because he already has a chiv of Maisa, Demai, Shekran is Chai b'Maisa. So let him give Maisa. Oh, what's the big deal? Give the Maisa and then put it back. But he can't, because if he gives Maisa 10%, that means he's putting back 10% less than what he took. Because he took something 100% of 100 bushels, he puts back 90 bushels because 10% is giving Meiser. That's not what he took. So what should he do? This is what he does. Masra, he gives Meiser. The Noisen loy demei Meiser. And he has to pay the owner, he puts back the 90 bushels, plus he pays him the value of those 10 bushels that he set aside for Meiser. Says the Gemara, Gemara said, one thing I don't understand. You're telling me that in this case it's considered as if he bought it. He was sorting through the vegetables, and we're saying while he's sorting through the vegetables, he saw some nice ones, and he decided he wants to buy it as his. But how did it become his? He didn't. If he would have picked it up and say, "I'm going to buy it," as one thing. It was lying there in front of him, all sorting it out, it's all lying in front of him, and he decided, I'm going to buy this. What's lying right in front of me here, right here? How did it become his? Where's the transaction? He made Kenyan. Just because he thought about it, leaked his content becomes his. When it's chai b'maisa and it's chai b'maisa, Amar Rav Hoshia says, we're talking about a case. You're right. Technically, he's not chai b'maisa. It's not his yet at all. Even though there's a fixed amount, he can just give it back, as we said before. Even there's a fixed amount, he can change his mind and give it back. So how did it become his that he's chai b'maisa? We're talking about a yorei shamayim. We're talking about a God-fearing person. What do you mean? Going, for example, Rab Safra. Rab Safra is a God-fearing person that he considered it as if he bought it, even though he didn't buy it. The Kayim Menashe, he fulfilled by himself the David Emes Bilvava, that he always tells the truth. Now, what actually happened here? So the Rishonim tell a story. Rab Safra had a donkey that he wanted to sell. And he put it out there in front of the shul. He went into Daven, and he was in the middle of Krishma. In walks in a person, and he's walked to Rav Safra. I'm prepared to give you X amount of dollars, let's say $100 for the donkey. Rav Safra's in the middle of Krishma, he doesn't interrupt. So the guy thinks Rav Safra is not happy with the price. He said, I'll give you 150 for the donkey. Safra doesn't say a word. The guy says, I'll give you 200 for the donkey. Safra doesn't say a word. But when he finishes Krishma, he turns around to the guy and he says, I will sell it to you for the original amount you offered me 100. Because when you mentioned that price, I was prepared to sell to you, but I couldn't speak because I was in the middle of Krishma. So even though there was no real kinyan yet, why is he committed to offer to accept $100? But because in his mind, he made up that he'll accept it. Goma Beliba, it's as if he already sold it. So that's called a Yorei Shemayim, that he's such a God-fearing person. His integrity was beyond question. I never understood this story. Every time I learn it, it always bothers me. We're talking about not just an ordinary person, a Yorei Shemayim. A Yorei Shemayim in middle Krishma is the only problem he doesn't speak, or is he concentrating on the word that Krishma is not interested in doing business right now? Sounds like Mara, he in his mind was not in Krishma. His mind was listening to this offer about the donkey, and he decided, I'm going to sell it. That's a Yorei Shemayim. The Gemara here, Yorei Shemayim, is a term that seems to be describing not so much his religious side, but his honesty. And that's not a term we normally use for honesty. And plus, Rab Safra was a very big Amoira. So what does it mean? What's he doing in Krishma and doing business while he's reading Krishma? Something's missing in the story. Anyway, if somebody can mute themselves, it's background noise.
Okay.
Sorry?
A page.
We're up to the Mishnah now on page Ches 88A with some number in front and behind after that.
3.
3.
88.
Harvey, can you mute yourself?
How's that?
We just heard you, see. Okay. Click the mute button, Harvey.
Hang on.
Anybody who has a shot to understand what it means here, Rab Safra is a Yorei Shemayim, and he's doing business while he's saying Krishma, would love to hear it. Okay.
Maybe it's B'di'evid.
He's not a Yorei Shemayim. What's the big story here?
Or maybe he just realized that he hasn't said Krishma yet, and then it just happens to be then.
Yaakov Avinu met Yosef after 22 years, right? And he happened to say Krishma, and Yosef is all over him, and Yaakov doesn't say a word because in the middle of Krishma, he's focusing on his Krishma. We haven't seen his son for 22 years, and he's still focusing on the Krishma, and not in any way being distracted. And Rab Safra is thinking business in the middle of Krishma, and we call him Yorei Shemayim. There's something missing here. I don't know. I haven't seen anybody talk about it, so I don't know. Mishnah. Okay. So now this Mishnah, especially tomorrow, we're going to learn all the different parts of a scale and how you sell things with a scale, the good old-fashioned scales, where you have, there's two things suspended over there, and you have either where we have measuring cups, or in the scale with weights, you have either you put the food on one side, you have a counter weight on the other side. Let's say you have a counterweight, something that weighs a kilo, and then you put food on there, you keep on putting food on there until they both are equal. And then you know that you have a kilo of meat because you have a stone that weighs a kilo, for example, and they are equal. So now we're going to learn that when it comes to selling the Torah, so we just read in the Torah, but about the stones, that you shouldn't have two different stones. You have to be careful that your weights are very accurate. So the only way you can be really careful the weights are accurate is to be a bit generous and give us slightly more. So this way you're not cheating. So the Mishnah says as follows. And we also learned the last few days when you sell oil, that you have to give an extra 3 drops because there's something residue left behind. And then we said beyond that already, the guy's miyayish and leaves it behind. So the Mishnah is you have 3 kinds of people here. You have a wholesaler who sells in big quantities, but he sells less often. Then you have a balabas who happens to have some oil, he sells it one-off. And then you have a storekeeper who sells constantly but small amounts. So regarding the scales, how often do you have to clean the scales? Because what happens is that there's grime and oil and fatty stuff that gets stuck to the weights, and that adds to the weight. So we have to make sure that the weights are exactly what they're supposed to be. So hasitin, a wholesaler, and sitin actually means wheat, but somebody sells wheat in bulk, is mikaneach midoisav. He needs to clean out his glasses that he uses, his cups, his measuring cups that he uses. And what happens if when you use a measuring cup, you keep on pouring oil or wine, whatever you're using a measuring cup, it starts getting stuck, it gets there's a thick film on the side, and suddenly the contents inside the glass are not the same. It says a liter on it, but it's not really a liter of space there, volume, because you have this thin film, and over time it gets thicker and thicker. That takes up some of the volume. So he has to clean his measuring cups on a regular basis. What's a regular basis? Every 30 days. And then it's all right. Talk about liquids now. Balabayis, if you're a private balabos, once l'shneim asachayda. Since you do it very less often, you hardly sell. Once a year is good enough. Reb Shimon says precisely the opposite, the converse. He says that a wholesaler once a year is enough. Why? Because you're constantly pouring in and pouring out, you don't give it enough time for it to dry up and congeal. But a balabas does it once every once in a while, so you don't ever clean up properly, so it congeals over time. So balabas has more to worry about than a wholesaler. So the balabas therefore says, he said the balabas does it once a month, but the wholesaler once a year. What about chenvini, a storekeeper that does it on a regular basis, even more regular than a wholesaler, but in smaller quantities? He has to mekaner pamayim b'Shabbos. He has to clean it twice every week. Why? Because he sells all the time. Now, l'chayda, some people say this will follow the view of the first opinion, the Tanakama, that somebody who uses it very regular, like the sitain, has to clean it more often. So a chenvini is even more regular, has to clean it even more often. And others want to say that Shimon ben Gamliel would agree when it comes to a storekeeper that you have to clean it twice a week, even though he does it so regular. And the reason is because a storekeeper, we learned before, does not have to give away those 3 extra drops because he's busy, he doesn't have time, which means he always retains a little bit of oil inside his glass. So therefore, he needs to clean it far more often. Then the Mishnah continues. So that's a measuring cup for liquids. Now we're talking about the scale. I'll call mishkal. Every time he weighs things, the stone also gets wet and everything else. Every time he weighs things, he has to clean it up because they They also have like a receptacle, a receiving thing, and therefore things get caught in it and get caught, and it takes up. It adds to the weight, and it's not giving you an accurate weight. So you have to clean it every time before you're going to use it again. Yes, When do we say you have to continuously wipe all of these things? That's talking about the belach, liquid. Abel the yavish, if something dry like fruits, meat is also considered liquid, anything wet. But something dry like fruits ain't a tzaddik, you don't have to clean it at all. Now he said, when we sell something, let's say you're selling meat. So usually you would think you have a kilo of meat, you have a kilo of stone here, a kilo on the other scale, put a kilo of meat, and then you make sure you have enough meat that it equals the stone. We say that it's not good enough. You have to push down the meat a tefach. In other words, add more meat so that it actually is not level with the stone, but it's more. And that's how you know for sure you gave him at least the amount that he asked for. And we'll see in the Gemara, we're talking about a case where that's the custom of that place. So it means when you charge a price, you already include a little bit extra as well for that hachra. Okay, says the Mishnah further. So right now, the Gemara will say, we're talking about there's a minig to do the hachra. And let's say the minig in this city was not to give that additional meat, when you weigh it. You do ayin b'ayin, an exact amount, liter for a liter, for example. Then, after you weigh it, throw in an extra piece. How much extra, the Gemara will explain. And the Mishnah says, the Gemara will say what it is. Echad la'asara belach, the echad le'esim b'yavish. When it comes to liquid, how much should you add? If you had 10 liters of liquid, and then 1 liter is 10% of that, and 10% of 1 liter, in other words, 1%. You have to add 1% to whatever you sold him. So this way, you know for sure you sold him at least the amount that he expected. When it comes to yavish, ve'echad le'estim b'yavish. So we're talking about now 20 liters, and 1 liter to 20, which is a 20th, 5%. And then the Gemara has a question whether it means a tenth of that, which means a 0.5%, or is it a 20th of that, which would make it a 0.25%. So then the Mishnah continues. Mokim shenagu lomad bedaka lo yamud begasef. Let's say you buy a kav. Let's talk kilos. If you buy, you want to buy 5 kilos. There's 2 ways of doing it. You measure 1 kilo at a time, or you measure 5 kilos in one bulk. The difference is if you measure 1 kilo at a time, each time you have to add that tefach. If you measure 5 kilos at a time, you only do it once. You give them, they add extra meat, so it weighs down by a tefach. So obviously, there's a big benefit to the buyer if you do 1 kilo at a time. There's a big benefit to the vendor if you do it in bulk, 5 kilos at a time. So the Mishnah says, even the minig of the place is lamud bedaka to do it individually, each kav separately. That's 6 kav into a saw. If the guy wants to buy a saw, if the minig is to weigh 1 kav at a time, lo yamud begasa. Don't do it bulk because you're cheating that person. That person is entitled to have 6 hachrois. Begasa, if the custom of the city is to do it in bulk, lo yamud bedaka, then you're cheating the vendor. Limchik la yigdash. So you have a cup, let's say, and moichik is if you level off the rim of the cup, and that's what you get. That's called mechika. And godush is when you heap on top, and the Gemara later on said it's a third. A godush has a third more content than a mochik. So again, if a person says, give me a cupful, if the minig of the place is limchik, to level it to rim, lo yigdash. Don't be a nice guy and heap. You think you're being a nice guy, but the Gemara will explain later, we don't like, we discourage it. Even if the person prepared to pay for that extra. We don't want that. Do follow the minig of the place. And ligdash lo yimchak. And if the minig is to heap, don't level it off, even if you give the guy a discount because of the Ramoyim, the cheaters, as we'll see. Says the Gemara.
I got lost for a minute. Can you explain what's this lahachriyatefa business again? What's he doing?
You give him extra. Normal weight is you put a kilo stone here, you put a kilo of meat, right? And you wait till they level out. And then you say, so you have a kilo of meat because, right? You know how a scale works.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So, but we say that maybe it's not accurate. Maybe there's some moisture on the stone. It's not 100% accurate. And we want to make sure that you show at least a kilo of meat. So you have to add more than a kilo of meat, add a bit more so that the scale on the meat side tips downwards, right, by a tefach. So now you know for sure you gave that person.
Oh, I see. So I got to add a bit more because I couldn't understand the tefach. Right? So it's adding more, so it goes down.
Adding more so that it's on an angle.
Okay.
This way, so the Gemara asks, how do you know that? Right now, the Gemara things that we're asking, how do you know that you have to add a tefach at the time of the weight, the scale, weighing it? Amr Shlok, the word says the pasuk, Evan Shlema, a complete stone, Vot Tzedek, and a stone of just. Now, what do you have to add a stone of just? If you have an Evan Shlema, a proper stone, then obviously it's just. The Torah adds an extra word. So we darshan Tzedek Mishulcha V'Tenle. Sometimes you have to add from your own. Technically, he already got what he ordered. He ordered a liter of meat, and yet Tzedek, you have to justify from yourself or take from yourself and give that person a little bit extra to make sure you did everything right. So the Gemara, if you tell me the halacha says at the time of weighing it, you have to do that, tell me, let's say, explain the next part of the Mishnah. It says there, if you decided to give him exactly what he ordered a kilo, you give him a kilo, is nice and like your and afterwards, when you pack it up in the bag, throw in a little bit extra. And we said in the Mishnah, it's 1% for liquids, and either 0.5% or 1/4% for solids. Now, if you're talking about you have to do it at the time of weighing, what do you mean you have a choice to weigh it just like kilo by kilo and then throw something afterwards? If the Torah says that Evan Shleim of it said it, then you have to do it at the time of weighing it. You're right. There's no law that says that while you weigh it, you have to add. That's the meaning of the place called Hakra. And then in other places, they don't do that. They just weigh, whatever is an accurate weight. And then we say, okay, you have a choice. Either at the time of weighing it, you can add a bit more, or afterwards. If the eat more, the shlokish, a safe eat more. The shlokish's comment is on the safer. Why do you have to add afterwards? Because the Torah said, the actual said that you have to give of yourself a little bit as well. This way, for sure you gave an exact amount. Says the Gemara, eat more be learned. You give him girumin. How do you know that? So this is what the Shlakish was talking about. He's talking about that halach in the Mishnah. The kama girumin, and how much is that? So you have 1 liter to 10 liters and 1/10 of that. In other words, 1%. Then the Mishnah says, Echad le'asara belach, the echad le'esim. By Yavish, we say it's 1 liter to 20, and then a part of that 1 liter. How much? What does the Mishnah mean? Does it mean echad ma'asara belach? When it comes to liquids, it's 1 over 10. Le'asara de lach, and to 10 of lach, no, it's 1%. And then the echad me'esim b'yavish. Since we're doing 1 liter to 20 liters, it's a 20th at 1 liter as well. Le'esim b'yavish, which means basically it's like it's a 20th of a 20th. It's like a 400th, 1/4%. Oidim, or perhaps echad ma'asara la'asara delach. When it comes to liquid, it's 10. It's 10% of 10%. It's 1%. And that same 10% is of the 20 bottles, which is 1 bottle, which is then making 0.5%. Which one is it? Take it. Omar Ableili said it is so important, integrity in business. That the punishment for having false weights and cheating in business is worse than the punishment for someone who leads a life of debauchery. When it comes to arroys, it says Eila. You should anyone who does this is an abomination. But there the word Eila is spelled without a hey. And here by weights. In last week's parsha, it says that this is an abomination. Eila with a hey. And the word Eila, what does Eila have to do with punishment, severe punishment? Umay mashma the high el koshu. I know it means anything but severe. You'll see if it says there's Eile ha'aret lokach. The Nebuchadnezzar, when he took Yehoiachin, he went in to take all the strong people away from Israel. He replaced Yehoiachin with his brother Sikhiyo, and he took away all the strong people in Israel and brought them to Babel, which turned out to be a blessing because that's why Babel became Malkam HaTorah. But he took all the strong people, and what's the word used? Eile. So we say Eile means strong. Now, what in the world is the hay? It's as if to say, because there's an extra hay by the word Eila, that means arroyus is far more stringent than that's full scales is far more stringent than arroyus. What's pshat? What does it have to do with the hay? Siddur says that what exactly is tshuva all about? So you have an avera, and then we do tshuva an avera. What exactly does avera mean? The word avera means over. You passed away, you went away. But there's a hay at the end. What do you mean? What's the hay? So that we know the Gemara Menachos, we learned the world was created with a Yud and a K. Yud created Olam Haba, and a hay was created Olam Hazeh. In Hashem's name, you have Yud, K, Vav, K. And each letter of Hashem's name describes a different level. And this world is the lowest level, which is the hay. In fact, we can learn in Menachos there in Daf Chav Tesah, actually, that the world is considered like the letter hay. We have a little thing that we do tshuva. But this world is a letter hay. What happens, and that is our connection with Hashem. So what's an Avera? Avera is Avar Hay. You disconnected the hay from the rest of Hashem's name. The rest of Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav, and the last K is all one thing. We do mitzvahs, we connect everything together, but you did an Avera, Avar Hay, you took the hay away. What's tshuva? Tshuva is Tashuv Hay, bring the hay back. That's what tshuva is all about. Reconnect to the rest of Hashem, and that's how you do tshuva. And that's what tshuva is all about. So Eila is that here it has that by when it comes to the weights, it says that you're such a severe avera that you're affecting the hay. When you do arayis, it's an avera, but it doesn't affect the hay. These abominations, but these abominations you're doing is Eila, that it's so severe that it's disconnecting the hay from the rest of Hashem's name. That's what the Gemara means. Maybe. Then the Gemara continues. What are you talking about? But Gabai Royis, not me. Doesn't by Royis also it says Eila, says Eila. That second Eila, which says by Royis, is to tell you that here you'll get chorus, but you won't get chorus when it comes to midas. Even though it's a terrible thing, being dishonest and deceptive, but nevertheless, chorus you won't get. We would have thought that you should get, because it says an abomination, you get chorus. So this should be included in that abomination. Now, not because the Rashbam explains, not because of Gzeira Shava, we can't make up Gzeira Shavas on our own, nor is it because of Kal V'Chomer. You could have said, if Aroyas, which is not such a severe Avera, gets Karas, surely in the case of what do you call it? Surely in the case of dishonesty, surely you should get Karas. You can't, that's not the reason here, because we have a rule, we had beginning of a commentation, and we'll have it in you cannot punish someone with a kal v'chomer. Why can't you punish someone from a kal v'chomer? So there's a couple of reasons given. The Mashal says very nicely, because just because you weren't smart enough to repudiate the kal v'chomer, how do you know someone else who's even smarter couldn't repudiate the kal v'chomer? So therefore, maybe yesh pircha. That's why you cannot rely on a kal v'chomer punishment. But I forgot who else says this. Someone else has the reason is just the other way around. The reason is you did an avera and you got punished. That punishment is really a kapara, an atonement. But if you did a severe avera, how do you know that the punishment for the weaker avera is enough of a punishment to atone you when it comes to a more serious avera? So therefore, you cannot punish someone from a kal v'chomer. But the Gemara's point here is it says whoever does these abominations get karas. So therefore, not because of kal v'chomer, not Gzeira Shava. This is the Torah refers to scales, full scales, as if it's an abomination. So maybe you should get karas. That's why I say Eila. And it says the Gemara further. So let me understand. If you get karas for aroyas and you don't get for being dishonest, so in what way is it stricter? Says the Gemara. Elamayid fayu. So what do you tell me that being dishonest is strict? It's not stricter. The punishment is weaker. Said Gemara, the hosam efshe b'tshuva v'hocha loy efshe b'tshuva. There you can do tshuva, and here you can't. By aroyas, if you do tshuva, your tshuva will be accepted. The Rashbam brings the pasuk shuvu bonim shayim. Come back to me, all your wild children. And furthermore, we'll have a makkos in the third paragraph. We'll learn that when you're chayiv karas, if the bezin decides to mete out malchus, give you lashes, you're no longer chayiv karas. You can retract, you can rescind that karas. But when it comes to stealing, how do you do tshuva? How do you know who you stole from? If you have a full scale and how many customers you would have had, how will the world know to do tshuva? Nobody live above a kama that you can buy things for the community, fix the roads. That's not a perfect solution. That's when you have no solution. So therefore, here you can do tshuva by arayos. You can do tshuva, and now very interesting the thing about the Rashbam says here by arayos you can do tshuva. You can go get malchus. You can get malchus because this is what the whole thing was. The whole argument in Eretz Yisrael 450 years ago was when Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, after the Inquisition. So many Yidden, couldn't stand the test to give up their whole fortune and leave. So they stayed behind and they had to behave as if they were Christians. And we know that they were caught, they were sentenced to the order de fe and so on. So there were a lot of Yidden later when they left Spain and they felt, look, I betrayed my religion. I ate on Yom Kippur, I ate chametz on Pesach because that's what the Christians made them do. So what's the point of remaining a Yid? What's the point of doing any more mitzvahs? Rabbi Yaakov Beirav saw that. So he decided that he'll set up a bezin in Tzfas. And this bezin is going to, and make sure that this bezin has the status of a bezin like the good old days. And he'll give malchus to anyone who comes forward and confesses the Eid on Yom Kippur or Eid Chametz and Pesach, which is Chayiv Karis. And then them getting malchus, they'll be expiated from their sins. And then they can once again become, frum again. That was his motive. So he learned a Rambam that basically with the Rambam, the Rambam himself says it's not 100% clear, but he basically learned from the Rambam that if all the rabbis in Israel decide to convene a bezin and confer on this bezin smicha, it's as if it came from Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what he did. And he, on his bezin, was the Bes Yosef. He had the greatest scholars of that time with him. Reb Chaim Vital also, the Alshich, the Mabit, all these great people. The problem was politically he did not involve the rabbi at that time in Yerushalayim, the Ralbach, the son of the Ram Chaviv, the one who wrote An Yaakov, and he was enraged. How can you make a bezdin and claim that you are smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu when you don't include Yerushalayim? Ki mitzi and teitzei seira. So he started a war against it, and Shaul chose Malbach. You can see the chose back and forth, and it got very, very, very personal to the extent Marie Beirav said to him, "You were in Spain, and you ate treif. How can a mouse that ate pork talk to me and tell me what I can do in the bezin or not?" And the Maral answers back, and he says that it's not my fault that I grew up in Spain. At least I did tshuva and I'm back here. But if you would have been in Spain, you would continue to eat pork today. So anyway, it got very, very personal. But as a result of that, they eventually stopped. The smicha didn't pass on. But they say quite a few people went through that bezin and got malchus, so that sort of expiated their sins. It didn't have to get chorus, and they became frum again. That was the motive. So that's what the Rashbam says over here, that you could do tshuva. Fascinating tastes here, by the way. Tastes hasam efshe b'tshuva. So there's two opinions there. One opinion is the one that we always say. You can do tshuva for committing a sin of immorality, provided you didn't create a mamzer. But if you live with a married woman and she had a child, she conceived because of you create a mamzer. What does the tshuva help? The mamzer is there. In fact, we learned the Gemara. It's in Chagiga and Yevamis. It's a ma'uvis shalayachol iskan. It's a sin that you can never correct. If you created a mamzer. That's the view of most. But Rab Chaim Kohen learns, he says that no. He says that if you have a mamzer, you can still do tshuva. He says that if that true, the mamzer is a living thing and the avera is always there. Boys have to do tshuva. Boys have to do tshuva. Hashem said you do an avera, do tshuva, and you did tshuva. So what if the mamzer is still there? That part of it you can't fix up, but you can definitely do tshuva on any avera. He says. Vashenk and a gazan can't because who are you going to return it to? Interesting discussion. Okay, now, if you want to know what Hashgacha Pratis is, the Gemara is going to talk about the parsha we read today in the Chumash. Says the Gemara. We'll get to the second. Says the Gemara. Rab Levi says, since we're mentioning things Rab Levi said, Rab Levi said, Kosher Gezel Hedi, Yeshu Gezel Goy, stealing from an ordinary person is worse than stealing from Hegdish. How do we know that? Shezeh hikdim chet lemila, zeh hikdim mila lechet. If you look in the pasuk, excuse me, when you steal from another person, it says nefesh kisechta, you sinned. Mal is when you enjoyed it. As soon as you took it, you're already a sinner, even before you had any enjoyment from it whatsoever. Mashenk, when it comes to Hegdish, it says, in other words, it's there in the Chumash where it talks about in the end of Vayikra, Pasha Vayikra, where you know someone gave you something and then you deny you ever had it. Gave you a pekadon to watch and then you denied you ever had it. You're already considered a sinner, even though now you became the sinner when you said Bava Basra. You never gave me anything, even though you're standing right here, didn't even enjoy it yet. He's already called a sinner. But when it comes to Me'ila, stealing from the Hegdish, we know the laws of Hegdish is that you're not chayiv unless you enjoy it. It says a pasuk is Sima Mal v'chata. You have to enjoy it before you can be considered a sinner. You have to enjoy it. So we see that this chet for a hedyot is far more serious. The Mashal explains beautifully. He says that the reason why you have to enjoy it by Me'ila is because by a person, the moment you took it away from that person, you got it for it. By the Eibishter, even if it's sitting in your house, the Eibishter is everywhere. So wherever you have the object, it's still Hashem's. He never took it out of his rishus until you used it for your personal self. Then you were moil. Anyway, says about it further. Hashem is far more generous than a human. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Beirach Yisrael Be'eser Mishtayim. In Parshas B'chukaisai, he benches us with the 22 letters of the Alabais, even though the 27, we don't count the Manspach. As he says Manspach, and the Nevi'im came along and taught us with them. Even though we knew before, we forgot and they brought it back. But we generally say that 22 letters in Alabais. The Kilim, but when it came to we'll see in a minute what that means. The Kolim, when it came to curse them, is only B'Shmeina. Only 8 letters of the Alabais in Parshas B'chukaisai. What do you mean? We'll see in a minute. Baruch HaBe'eser time, he benched him between 2 letters. The passage starts off im bechukaisai. That's an aleph. Im, and the last letter in the brachas is kaimius. It says kaimius, which ends with the letter saf. Okay, so therefore it starts with an aleph and ends with eilich eschem kaimius. So the entire alabase, the entire gamut is there. He cursed them with 8 letters. Why? So there it says ve'im b'chukaisai timasu. Ve'im is with a vav, right? And the last letter is chukaisai gola nafshim. And it says there as chukaisai gola nafshim. It ends with the letter mem. So it starts with the letter vav, ends with the letter mem. There's only 8 letters there. The ilu Moshe Rabbeinu. Birchan b'shmeina in this week's parsha, he benched them with 8 letters. V'kilam be'esrim, and he cursed us with 22 letters. Birchan b'shmeina, he benched them with 8 letters. It says v'hoya im shamaya tishman starts the letter above. That's how the parsha starts. If you listen to Hashem and so on and so forth, and then the last letter is what do you call it? Le'avda, serving other idols, ends with the letter mem. So from Vav to Mem is 8 letters. That's the brachas. The Kil but he cursed it with 22 letters. It says V'hoya, starts with a Vav, Im Tishma, and the last word is in this week's parasha for the end of the close is the Ein Koina. They're trying to sell them as avodim and nobody wants to buy them. And ends with the letter Hey. Starts with Vav, and you go to work around the whole alabase to get to the letter Hey. 22 letters. Rashi on Chumash says that Moshe Rabbeinu actually tempered the clause. First of all, he said it in Lashon Yochid, not Lashon Rabim. But the Eibishter was collective punishment. Moshe Rabbeinu was not collective punishment, not meeting out collective punishment. He was saying he's individual, Lashon Yochid. And plus, Moshe Rabbeinu there, he changed Shemayim and Barzel and Oris and Choshes. But from one perspective, Moshe Rabbeinu, it seems from here, gave us more clauses than the Eibishter did. I mean, it's pretty scary and daunting when you read all the clauses. But there's a very interesting thesis there. The bottom thesis, Kilu Bes Mishtayim, you have a chance to learn it. We know that thesis, there's a big, if the thesis says, people say that Parshas Netzavim is the Klolos. If you read Parshas Netzavim, some of the Klolos there are even worse than Parshas Kisavai. So we read Parshas Netzavim always before Rosh Hashanah. We want the year to end with all the Klolos to end. So they say that the Tzavim, and the reason why we read the Tzavim, in other words, we'll always read the Tzavim before Rosh Hashanah, and we'll put Matas and Masay together, even though the 2 long Pashas, and we'll read the Tzavim before Rosh Hashanah rather than separating Matas and Masay and reading the Tzavim afterwards. We don't want the Klolos to spill into next year. So that's one version, one understanding, right? Because you want the yichla tichla shana the klalisa. Tosfos, however, says from this Gemara here, it's clear. He says that the klalas ended in Parshas Kisavai. Doesn't say the it says here the klalas end. The Tzavim Moshe Rabbeinu is still talking to them, right? He didn't stop talking, and yet when we say here, where did the klalas end? We don't go to the Tzavim to reveal over there and say that's where klalas end. We say it ended in Kisavai. So Tosfos says the Tzavim is not the klalas, and the idea is we don't want the last Shabbos of the year to be klalas. We want the last Shabbos of the year to be a good parsha. So therefore, the Tzavim is not klalas. And he says, look at Shavuos. Shavuos is the same thing. We always read B'chukaisa. We always want Bamidbar, at least Bamidbar. Sometimes not say also, but Bamidbar should be before Shavuos to be a break. We don't want the last Shabbos because Shavuos is Rosh Hashanah for Peiros Eilan, for the fruits. We don't want the last Shabbos of the year to be klalas. So we have a break Bamidbar. So it's an interesting argument whether the Tzavim is considered klalas or brachas. And just a little bit further in the Gemara.